Lots to expect from the show tonight. After pushing Qatar into a corner, Saudi Arabia is willing to send private jets to Doha to escort Qataris to the kingdom for the annual Hajj pilgrimage. Why is that? And Donald Trump is losing friends rapidly. We talk about the continuing fallout of his statements following Charlottesville violence. And apart from the ongoing civil war, Yemen battles the cholera epidemic. 2,000 people are dead. 500,000 are said to be affected. And is the transport evolution closer than we think? WION speaks exclusively to Tony Seba, who is an instructor in entrepreneurship, disruption and clean energy at Stanford's Continuing Studies program. But first, the big story. The Chinese, like people all over the world, have a sense of humor. But like everywhere else, jokes tend to get lost in translation, or there are cultural codes that render jokes incomprehensible. It could well be that the jokes aren't funny at all. This video, titled 7 Sins of India, has been produced and distributed by the Chinese news agency Xinhua. It's about the 2-month-long standoff between India and China on the Doklam Plateau in Bhutan. It's obviously propaganda, but not of the usual heavy-handed variety that one expects from totalitarian governments. 7 Sins of India is definitely slick, but fails on a number of counts. It presents China's position on the Doklam Plateau as fact when any credible scholar on the subject knows it is a misrepresentation of facts. It also lies about Bhutan accepting the plateau as Chinese territory. The language of this video is unacceptable, with its references to India as a thief. Worse still is the video's ugly racism, with an obviously Chinese actor badly made up to resemble a Sikh. 7 Sins also fails because it presents an image of China which does not accord with the known facts. China is not a benign power. It does not hesitate to threaten or intimidate to get its way. The creation of artificial islands on the South China Sea is blatant land grab. The Chinese state's treatment of its own citizens violates every canon of freedom and liberty. We at WION thought it was necessary to share this video with our viewers to set India's record on Doklam straight, using China's own propaganda against them. It is also intended to help us understand the Chinese, how they think and behave. Where does India stand in respect to that great country? While this video has been made by the Chinese, not all Chinese think like the producers of this video. Watch one excerpt.
On June the 18th, Indian border troops carrying weapons and driving bulldozers illegally crossed the delimited boundary into the undisputed Chinese territory.
Look at the facts over here. The date is actually June 16th. Indian troops did not carry arms and did not enter Bhutan illegally. The 2007 India-Bhutan bilateral treaty requires both sides to cooperate when their security is threatened. The Doklam Plateau is disputed, with Bhutan and China negotiating since 1984 on its ownership.
You may think Doklam is a disputed area, but the truth is both India and the international community have recognized the place as a part of China, according to the 1890 convention between Great Britain and China relating to Sikkim and Tibet. And the thing is, this exact convention is under the protection of international law.
Let's get you the facts. The fact is that the international community has been non-committal about China's claims on Doklam. India has never accepted Doklam as part of China since Bhutan disputes it. And India sees the 1890 convention as relevant to the borders of Sikkim. China violated the agreements of 1988 and 1998 then to maintain status quo on the Doklam Plateau. Road building violated that status quo.
Well, this is most outrageous. We thought India would have been wiser after the first stupid excuse, but this time it attempted to justify its incursion in the name of protecting Bhutan.
Let's get you the facts. India and Bhutan are bound by the 2007 treaty. That treaty requires them to cooperate on issues relating to their national interests. The treaty says neither government shall allow use of its territory for activities that are harmful to the national security and interests of the other. The treaty requires India to train and equip the Royal Bhutan Army. All right. In fact, joining me right now in the studio is Manoj Kewal-Ramani. He's an entrepreneur. He has the experience of working in Chinese broadcast media for a couple of years. I'm also hoping to be joined in by Andrew K.P. Leong, international and independent strategist. But Manoj, coming to you first. I mean, what do you make of this video, first of all?
Well, I think there are three ways that we can look at this. The first aspect is to look at what the video contains. Substantially, the points that it's making are not very different from what the Chinese have been saying, what the official Chinese government line is. The problem is the style. Stylistically, it is unmistakably racist. And it's racist not in just the caricature of Indians in terms of their physical appearance, but also in terms of the depiction of Indians with the words that it uses as thieves, robbers, people who are conniving, and also people who are dim-witted, who can't get the simple fact that this is Chinese territory.
But is that how the Chinese look at Indians? Is that the common perception?
I mean, that's the second point there, that I don't think that is the common perception. In my experience of being in China and working with broadcast outlets in China, generally the perception towards India is fairly benign. It's a perception of India being this country with massive potential, which has been bogged down by democracy and internal conflicts, and somebody who at some level wants to compete with China but is just unable to do so. So there is an element of patronizing India in that context, but I don't think the view is hostile inherently.
Okay, in fact, Andrew Leong, international and independent strategist, he joins me live from Hong Kong. Mr. Leong, thanks so much for joining us. How do you see this video? It's obviously very racist, and it's also a misrepresentation of facts in a sense.
Well, as far as the facts are concerned, I think that it rehearses China's position. But as far as the caricature is concerned, I mean, that's what it is. It's just like Fox News in the United States. I mean, this happens in every country, especially whenever there is an issue which is causing a lot of concerns among the local the national population. Obviously, the media would take advantage of that, and some news channels would characterize as certain issues. I think that's understandable. As far as this caricature picture of Indians, I mean, that's an extreme. I'd agree that generally, I mean, China's position has been very friendly towards the Indian people, but whenever that comes to caricature, I mean, anything goes. As I said, I mean, you look at other news, as Fox News and some of the channels have characterized various issues. But I think the fact remains that this is something that touches on the sense of nationalism and the national sovereignty, which informs a lot of the Chinese people. They can't see that why Chinese territory, China's held territory, even if disputed, you know, that could allow such incursion. And obviously there was a rising tide of opinion.
I think that's somewhat similar to what Manoj said, who is a guest here in the studio. He's an entrepreneur. He's worked in China with the broadcast media over there. But I want you both to just hold on for a bit and let's quickly recap what exactly was this video all about, what it said. Take a look once again.
On June the 18th, Indian border troops carrying weapons and driving bulldozers illegally crossed the delimited boundary into the undisputed Chinese territory as a disputed area. But the truth is, both India and the international community have recognized the place as a part of China, according to the 1890 convention between Great Britain and China relating to Sikkim and Tibet. And the thing is, this exact convention is under the protection of international law. Well, this is most outrageous. We thought India would have been wiser after the first stupid excuse, but this time it attempted to justify its incursion in the name of protecting Bhutan.
Well, I'd agree with her there on one account that it is outrageous, this video per se. But Manoj, if I can ask you, give us, if you could recall some personal experiences while you were in China. What are the people like? What is their idea of India?
I think their idea of India is pretty straightforward. It's a country with which China has a long history in terms of the concept of civilizational history, but there's been very little contact. So there is very little information. I mean, even today, tourism between India and China is extremely scarce. There's about 500,000 Indians that go to China as tourists, about 200,000 Chinese who come to India as tourists, predominantly those who are interested in Buddhism. There's very little understanding of how the Indian system works, how the government works, how the media works. And I think that probably goes both ways. There is very little understanding on both sides. And so therefore, people-to-people contact is significantly required. On this specific video, particularly on the context of Chinese media, my experience of Chinese media is that there is a great focus now on digital media in China too. And one of the things that they want to do is that they want to make what is essentially very dry diplomatic government language far more palatable to a wider audience. And I think that is where they've attempted, that is what they've attempted in this video. It's obviously misfired because it is clearly racist, but I wouldn't, because it's Xinhua, which is the official news agency, one would accord certain amount of credit to it, that this is probably the official line. But my sense would be that this is a producer of a show called Spark who's just crossed the line and made it offensive. But I don't think...
Is it like a spoof, or do they actually mean what they're saying and they're serious about it?
I think it's attempted to be a spoof, but even a spoof does not come out of the blue. There has to be an underlying sense of stereotypes which it builds on. How wide that sense of stereotypes is debatable. I don't think it's a very wide acceptable sense, but obviously that exists, and therefore you have something like this which has come out.
Okay, Manoj, hold on to that thought. Mr. Leong, what do you think is the underlying message when you see a video like this? What are the Chinese trying to project? What should we make of it?
Well, I think that China is sending a mild warning to the Indian government. In fact, this is the second time such mild warning has been registered, because a couple of days ago there was a minor perceived China incursion in Ladakh on the northwestern side of India, and then some Chinese soldiers were crossing into the Pangong Lake area, and then both sides threw stones, resulting in some injuries. Now, these are all very mild incursions, and these incursions will not have taken place without some degree of agreement from the Chinese government, because the soldiers themselves are unlikely to do this on their own. And this, of course, is a very low-level kind of thing. It's another kind of warning.
Okay, hold on to that thought. Let's take another piece of news that we're getting from China. Well, rely on China's Global Times to keep the Doklam tension simmering. A write-up now has quoted a retired admiral saying that India could be issued an ultimatum this month to withdraw from Doklam. The Global Times named him as Rear Admiral Xu Guangyu, who has described him as an advisor to the Arms Control and Disarmament Association, and quoted him as warning the ultimatum would clearly tell India and the world that China will give a certain number of days to India to withdraw its troops. After the deadline, if Indian troops still remain within China's territory, China has multiple ways of pushing India back. A few dozen military personnel and one bulldozer in Doklam, they meant, is a piece of cake for the Chinese military. The admiral said Indian troops would resist. There would be bloodshed, and China must be prepared for a military conflict. But he said the Chinese military was superior to India's. It had world-class rocket artillery, and its air force could operate from at least 5 airports in Tibet. Mr. Leong, coming to you, a retired admiral saying this, how representative is that of the official Chinese, stand?
Well, that's not the official Chinese stand. I mean, anything official, of course, this is not very different from the China's position, though, because China's position is that this is not control territory, even though it's disputed, but you can't cross the line of control, arbitrarily like that. And then if there are disputes, it ought to be discussed and negotiated. And I don't think that China would allow this. But on the other hand, this he's a retired admiral, and of course, to say that he is an authorized spokesman is really going a little bit too far. But that's not far away from China's position, though.
Okay, and Manoj, is this Chinese psyche to drift, into war, an issue which can be resolved through dialogue, or is it more about placating the People's Liberation Army?
I think part of it is that the Chinese strategy, if you were to look at it, is about incrementalism. I don't think war is opportune right now for China. There's lots going on internally within the country with the 19th People's Party Congress coming up. So there is obviously lots going on. Currently in August, Chinese leaders are in meetings to discuss the agenda for the Congress. So I don't think there is anything in terms of that we can take this as an ultimatum and take it as a guarantee. But what we can see is that the incremental approach is continuing. I would take global times always with a pinch of salt, but that does not mean that India does not have to be prepared for eventualities. Right. India needs to be prepared for eventualities. What I think the Chinese need to be thinking about at this point of time, while all this saber rattling is going on, is war. While war might be an option for them eventually if this is not resolved, I don't think so. But what they need to really think about is how they are damaging the Chinese brand in India. What this video does, the outcome of this video is, it might be a mild warning, I don't think so. A similar story was published in Xinhua on August 9th, which spoke about the 7 sins of the Indian military. So this just drew from that. What I think is happening is that the Chinese brand in India is being tarnished.
And they've touched a raw nerve. I mean, by being racist, now people who never paid heed, they will obviously have an opinion on China.
Absolutely. And it is this that I feel that these are steps by which China is shooting itself in the foot when it comes to India. India has been restrained, India has been measured, and China has been belligerent. And that completely contradicts the narrative of China's peaceful rise. And it probably gives the world, the suspicions that the world has of China's rise some more meat.
Right. Mr. Leong, would you agree with what Manoj here has to say?
Well, not entirely, because the whole thing started with China building a road. And of course, no country can be allowed in building a road within its own territory. I'm talking about this, not the disputed territory even.
No, but does China need to have a rethink about the way it's going about handling Doklam?
No, I don't think so. But I agree with the incremental approach. There's no way that China wants a war. In fact, the push to come to the show, it would be very dangerous, slippery path for both countries, because don't forget, both countries are nuclear powers. So I think that the whole thing needs to be resolved peacefully through diplomatic channel, and both sides should not rattle up the rhetoric. But on the other hand, the Indian incursion into Bhutan territory, of disputed territory with China, has been going on for 2 months, and this cannot be allowed to carry on without some impact on China's credibility as a nation. So I think that this issue needs to be resolved behind the scenes through diplomatic channels.
Give me a second.
But, right, you want to say something, Manoj?
Yeah, I think this is where the problem lies. Yes, I do agree that China does not want a war. A war would be really problematic for them too. But at this point of time, if you do not want a war, and the point is to try and get to a peaceful solution through back channels, after all that's been said and done, something like this raises the pitch and makes it far more difficult for that diplomacy to work.
Absolutely. It's as if to say a point of no return, because look at the way India has really carried on, like Manoj was mentioning, in a very measured approach. China, could have perhaps handled it, toning the rhetoric down a few notches, maybe more than a few notches.
Well,
Mr. Leong,
I mean, after all, it's a caricature kind of program. On the other hand, as I said, it is part of a warning, part of a soft warning. I mean, it's not compared with the earlier. If we think about China's propaganda, say about 10 years ago, it was so dry and so dull, and now it's a kind of in the Chinese perception, it's a kind of amusing kind of thing. Everybody knows it's a caricature. As I said, that's not the usual view held by Chinese people towards India. But I mean, as in the case of Fox News in the United States or other countries, I mean, that's what happens in a sort of vibrant video environment.
All right, I think we'll leave it at that. Of course, this is something on which predictably, India and China will have their own very take, and they'll stick to that. Thanks so much, Mr. Leong and Manoj Kewalramani, for joining me here on the show. We're going to be taking a short break, but after that, more on Gravitas. Saudi Arabia says it's reopening its border with Qatar to allow Qataris to attend the annual Hajj pilgrimage. This even after pushing Qatar into a corner. We explore this and more in our next segment. We'll be right back.